here's a lovely building, and here, slightly shaded out, is a very ugly building which many of you may walk past. In fact, you probably close one eye as you walk past it, and in the Grassmarket, Castle Terrace, just so you don't inadvertently look at it. So this is our 250,000 square foot building that we founded CodeBase in 2014. We became the largest tech incubator in the UK. Weirdly, we grew 7 times in 4 years. Just in Edinburgh, we've had over $600 million invested into the companies that we have in there. Now we have 3 core cities, Edinburgh, Stirling and Aberdeen, and we now support 24 cities through a big collaboration with Barclays, with over 400 companies. So there's 103 companies in Edinburgh today. Over 800 jobs in Edinburgh in the last few years, and on the books we've got 1,200 new jobs in the next 12 months, and I have no idea how on earth we're going to hire them. So hopefully the university can expand and just pump out lots more bodies that we can suck into our startups. In terms of the thought process, a significant number of the companies that are coming through here are digital health tech companies. So the core thesis is Mark Andreessen's software is eating the world. And you only need to look in your own pocket to know that that's true. Everything that software hasn't eaten yet, software will. So the idea is that apart from flogging coffees to each other, every single company will end up having software as the core piece of value within that offering. And you just need to look at what happened, taxis and Uber. You need to think about when was the last time you ever paid for an international call since the invention of Skype, etc. And that change in the world is something that we both understand, and more importantly for Edinburgh, I want to create those new types of jobs, those digital jobs here, because I don't want all the jobs to be sitting in California. Thank you very much. So that's what we've been trying to do, with some success. But of course, the whole point of what's software doing, when you inject software into an area, into a marketplace, you get deflation. It's really obvious, but things that used to be really expensive become very cheap. So this hyper-deflation, and it's all down to Moore's Law. And you've all seen versions of Moore's Law, why computers get faster and faster, etc., etc. But you know the really depressing thing. So there's Moore's Law, which you're all aware of. But in healthcare, it's the opposite. So we call it Eram's Law, because the cost of creating a drug is not exponentially decreasing, it's exponentially increasing. So the staggering costs of creating all these new medicines that we want. And this is a massive, massive problem for society. How on earth are we going to afford healthcare? And pick whatever graph you want. Here's public expenditure versus the share of GDP. Staggering increase. Here's the local version, NHS, budget growth. Now, of course, see this budget growth? That's not paying for lots of awesome stuff to happen. That's just managing what we have today. Hospitals, the NHS, which we all love, the NHS is the jewel in the crown of Britain. We all love it. We fought wars for that kind of thing. And we have this situation of real fear of what on earth are we going to do? And the reality now in numbers, it can take, just in the drug discovery piece, it can take $2.5 billion to bring a drug to market. And surely we can do better. But when we're thinking in CodeBase about building new technologies, building new products, we're thinking about the value chains and where the value is generated and captured. And when you look across that, and this is a very unbelievably simplified, and you can tell it's not a nice picture because I just made it myself, but looking from that sort of drug discovery piece through regulation and whoever's paying for it, be it a government or an employer, the distribution, the pharmacy, to the hospitals themselves, the physicians, the healthcare professionals, social care, all the way through to the patient-facing piece. The reality is that a huge amount of the new funky stuff that happens at either end of that. So yes, there are billions and billions being spent on new drugs being developed. That's lovely. I'm glad that people are trying to develop new drugs. Great. And on the other side, at the very patient-facing side, often quite appy sorts of technologies. You know, you've seen your iPhone, you've got lots of cool health apps and so on. That's all great, but one of the reasons that that's easier to do is because you don't have to deal with the horrible, gnarly regulation of dealing with global healthcare and the NHS or whatever country you're dealing with. You don't have to get involved with that bit if you can deal with the nice, happy, appy piece on one side, or indeed you be involved with the big behemoth drug discovery piece on the other. But I would argue that if we're going to save the NHS, and that's partly what the title of tonight's event was about, I would argue that it's this middle bit that we need to solve. So much of it is not necessarily about some awesome new drug, although that would be great. So much of it is about the system. How can we make the system better? And how can we utilize software not to hit healthcare professionals over the head with, but to empower them to be more human and to do more better, to take the stuff that computers are great at and let the computers do that, to free up healthcare professionals to be amazing, and also at the same time to have that hyper-deflationary effect to save the NHS financially. So this is what we're empowered by with the startups that we have, such as RelayMed and CareSource and many others that we deal with in Scotland, trying to solve this problem. But thinking about that central piece within the value chain, you know, just as a simple example, blood plasma is one of the most wasted products in the world. It's staggering and appalling how much blood is chucked away. And this is a supply chain management and logistics problem. And that's been solved elsewhere. But it seems sometimes that hospitals are surprised by a Monday morning. But the reality is that Amazon know, in the big factory in Fife, Amazon know what book you're going to buy before you buy it, and they have that book waiting for you. Those supply chain, the serious cleverness in software and data analytics around supply chain management have been solved in other disciplines. We need to take those insights from all of these other disciplines and drive them into healthcare where we can do the right thing. And of course, the startups are coming. So we've got a whole bunch of companies. There's over 100 companies in Edinburgh over the years that I've supported trying to do interesting stuff. Here's a little screenshot just to show the huge area. This is an unbundling moment where you have best-in-class individual startups trying to do one thing. So there's care management. We've got CareSource in Edinburgh, who hopefully Edinburgh's next unicorn, fingers crossed. Communications, radiology, patient monitoring, surgery, appointments, referrals. These things are happening. These startups are there. Now, in the world of startups, many will die. Only one or two become the next Facebook for their thing. But nonetheless, that stuff's happening, and it's an exciting moment, and you can read lots of cool press articles about what they're doing. Here's the AI version of that. And as you know, artificial intelligence, when we're not talking about Terminator 2 here, we're talking about computers being able to understand data better than humans can. From initially identifying cat faces in the internet to now, of course, being able to spot a malignant tumour better than a radiologist can. And this stuff's all staggering, and you feel the immensity of the moment now as these entities are coming up and doctors are innovating themselves. But actually, so much of this stuff won't work. Because global healthcare is just like any big organization, any big dinosaur organization. The fact is that the big organizations are set up and optimized to kill off bad ideas. If you're a big company or a big organization, a core piece of what you have to do is to say no to bad ideas. That used to work last century. That doesn't work anymore. And so that optimization, or as we call them, the assassins of progress, or if we're going to use maybe a more biological term, we could call them corporate antibodies, the people who are going to say no, be it killed by committee, not a snowball's chance in hell, etc., etc. And that's what we have to deal with, because the fundamental painful insight that we've learned in CodeBase is, yes, startups can't sell, because We're startups and we're geeks and we don't know how to sell things. But big organizations can't buy. Procurement is appalling and just doesn't work at a fundamental level. And so, of course, we're thinking about biology this evening. It's been solved. It's been solved by nature. You'll all be aware, of course, of the waggle dance of the bee, where the bee comes into the hive and does the elaborate dance to tell all the other bees where the pollen is. And that's really well known, and it's amazing, and you can see David Attenborough talking about it, and that's all lovely, and all the lovely YouTube videos. But the really, really interesting thing from our perspective about the waggle dance is that not all bees follow it. 80% of the bees follow the directions and go to the pollen. 20% of the bees go in completely bonkers random directions, not the direction that the bee told them to go in. And if that makes obvious sense. If the bees always went to the place where the pollen was, then they'll eventually max out. There'll be a local maxima problem. They'll max that out. The plants will all be gone, and then the bees will die off. And so that idea of spending 20% of the resources, this barbell effect, 80% on the really solid, conservative, known stuff, and 20% on the mad, bonkers, moonshot, insane ideas. Now, of that 20%, 19% of those bees die finding nothing. 1% fly and find all of the new pollen. And it turns out that's exactly the way that startups work and why startups are different to big organizations. So this is the startup mantra. Any of you involved in startups have seen this before, the lean startup idea. And it's essentially trying to put the scientific method into building products, into building new stuff, to find out if you're building this thing, does anyone actually want it? Will anyone pay you for it? And that's taking these ideas, because remember, your business idea is just a hypothesis. Your business plan is just a business guess. So taking those ideas, building something, getting it out the door, the product, and then finding out if it's any good or not. And getting that information back, learning from it, and changing it. Now, this seems unbelievably obvious, but it's hardly ever done. Most people build their thing, build it and they will come, and that's it. And so, the thing that we learned in CodeBase was we're so focused on building startups that we thought all of the structures we're putting in place to allow these guys to grow were unique to that world. But what it's turned out is that it's actually big organizations that need to learn this stuff more than anyone. And it's not just the startup cosplay of sticking Post-it notes on the wall and everyone's lean and agile and all of that stuff. What it really is, it's about understanding how to innovate and make new things during conditions of extraordinary uncertainty. And that's the world we're living in. So startups don't know what the product is, who their customers are, or who would pay them for it. And this is the same thing with any of these new ideas. So point one is that big organizations like the NHS have to understand what startups really are. But that was only part one, that learning startup for staff and management. The truth is that it's senior management and CEOs and the like, and boards actually need to learn what it's like to be a startup investor. And I'm not talking about being capitalists and chucking money and so on. I'm talking about big organizations are allocating capital. And you have to allocate capital in a way to allow the waggle dance of the bees, to allow the sensible, safe stuff that we must have to survive, but also to be able to pay for and to understand the innovation of the mad stuff, that if it worked, it could be utterly transformative. And these structures are what we are now spending so much of our time on, teaching blue chip Fortune 250 companies this stuff, who are coming to us because they know that software disruption is real. And so what we've started doing with Kev and the University of Edinburgh and NHS Lothian is trying to collaborate to teach them what we know about this stuff. Because unlike some people, I don't have a passport to live anywhere else. I really love living in Edinburgh. I don't want there to be a zombie apocalypse Mad Max event where the only jobs are on Facebook in California and there's nothing for the rest of us. So we want this to continue. But we need to give the NHS some teeth. They need to understand. It's like Defense Against the Dark Arts in Harry Potter. They need to understand this stuff so that they can drive innovation forward and manage it. and not be crushed into the ground with the extraordinary increasing costs. So that's what I'd like to end on tonight. There's plenty more stuff that I can witter on about in this space, but hopefully some of that's been interesting, and thank you very much.